But there's some really good details though, like there's a conversation that Moira and Dwight have where he's explaining how all of this happens, like how the wind occurs. He explains like what the pressure equator is, and this was just things I genuinely learned that are like real. But yeah, in particular, like the way that none of the people in this book go, oh, it's this country's fault, right? Like there's an agreement that it's like a universal failure in some aspects. Like I think that's curious.
They heavily imply though that America is like the problem, because all of the American soldiers like are bursting into tears whenever they have to talk about it in the Australia town that they're in. But the whole thing was like y'all had said, it was like a false flag from one country that was flying a different country's planes, and then I think that's what caused America to then bomb the wrong country. And so I mean, like, technically maybe they started it, but also they were retaliating against what someone else had started. And this sounds like I'm defending America's war tendencies, which I am not. Just to put that out there.
Yeah, but I guess the thing that I was trying to you've perfectly sort of articulated what I was trying to demonstrate, which is like the understanding this book has, and maybe it's just because like of Shute's proximity to the two wars, and then of course like Vietnam's right on the horizon, because of the way that the book thinks these things, they feel very material and inconsequential is not the right word, but there's like a quality to the way that that Shute writes these characters talking about these things that feels very modern and contemporary, where it's like, oh yeah, like there was a misunderstanding with this and a misunderstanding with that. Obviously the internet changes how all of this would go now, but this sort of infosec aspect very much reminded me of the way that we still talk about wars and conflicts, where it's like, yeah, this country was, buying this resource from that country and flying, running this country's planes, and yeah, not much has changed, Yeah. All right, there was a passage.
Also, he's writing this before the Cuban Missile Crisis as well, which is like
correct.
Like that's a similar thing. Was like a misunderstanding, which almost sparked off a domino effect of nuclear bombs. So yeah.
Also caused by the US, coincidentally. So it is interesting that basically most of the minutes to midnight moments in history are caused by the American Empire. So that's something to think about, I think.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it?
I'm also obsessed with...
they also invented that.
Yeah, that's kind of their thing. I'm obsessed with...
Well, like the minutes to midnight thing.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Ironic. Why would you tell on yourself like that? There's a thing that's been happening in a lot of the like socialist and communist magazines I read, where like over the last like 5 years, it's gone from like America to the American Empire in a way that feels very Star Wars. And I think it's accurate, first of all. And second of all, it demonstrates something this book does as well, which is in these moments of crisis, language evolves and changes. There's a quality to the conversations that happen in this book where people, they've gotten really good at talking around specific things. Multiple times, Moira thinks of certain topics as being like dangerous or difficult, or like things that you want to avoid and things like that. But one of those things that people don't avoid is the logistics of what's happening. People are very interested in when is this thing moving, who dropped what bomb. But what they don't talk about is like how much time they have left, or the people that are already dead, or things like that. And I think it's part of the intimacy between Moira and Dwight is that they talk very openly about quite a lot of that, and even to the point where later on she asks about his family, and that's when he explains this kind of delusion he has. But yeah, the passage that I was going to read before was this is the guys talking in the submarine. And John turns to him. What did the Chinese think about all this? Oh, they had another angle altogether. They didn't specifically want to kill Russians. What they wanted to do was to turn the Russians back into an agricultural people that wouldn't want Shanghai or any other port. The Chinese aimed to blanket the Russian industrial regions with a cobalt fallout, city by city, put there with their intercontinental rockets. What they wanted was to stop any Russian from using a machine tool for the next 10 years or so. They planned a limited fall, out of heavy particles not going very far around the world. They probably didn't plan to hit the city even, just to burst maybe 10 miles west of it and let the wind do the rest. With no Russian industry left, the Chinese could have walked in at any time they liked and occupied the safe parts of the country, any that they fancied. Then, as the radiation eased, they'd occupy the towns. And then at one point, John goes, no, it's not John. Dwight goes, as they're talking through this conversation about who did what, he's like, do you mean to say that we bombed Russia by mistake? It was so horrible a thought as to be incredible. Some of the writing in this is really excellent. It was so horrible a thought as to be incredible. Really, really pithy and concise. And then they start to think of the little countries as the irresponsibles with their nuclear arsenals.
Yeah, I thought that was funny.
Yeah, that was really... I like they're having a laugh about it. I was like, yeah, that is it's good.
Yeah.
One thing I just was thinking about as you were reading was I don't know if this was predictable looking back through history, but like the whole thing, the whole plan is predicated on China having such explosive populace growth that they need to expand, but their repopulation rate has been shrinking along with a lot of other countries over the past decade or whatever. So it's kind of interesting that the entire premise of the initial main problem in the book from the 50s or 60s doesn't exist now, or at least would not exist to the point where they would be like, hey, let's nuke our neighbors because we're kind of maybe need some more land, but also we don't, and our women need to have more kids.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is just like China was a different kind of regime back then, a different kind of dictatorship back then, and they hadn't yet come to that realization. And they start to get real. Like, China is like fundamentally a very scary country, and they start to do things like control how many children you can have, and it develops like spy networks and stuff. Like, it's very fashy in a way that like I think goes unremarked on a lot. And so but the part of, to your point, JM, like part of the reason why that doesn't exist in China, for example, is they use those levers of control that they have to literally control like how many kids people are having for this exact reason. And overcrowding is still a big problem in China. But yes,
just as a fun tidbit, and I can't remember which country it was that I remember reading this study way back, but there was a study on some kind of like third world country, and they were looking at what the population rate does as the people become more educated and as a result become more not wealthy but become better off, and as education grows, population rate declines, because you used to need like 10 kids because some of them might die in childbirth because you didn't have good doctors, and then you had to have a bunch of them to till the land and farm and everything, and as the population gets smarter and everything, you are able to have less kids because you don't need them like the older generations used to. So that's kind of interesting to think back at the era that they were living in. Still physically, I mean, they weren't agrarian, but they still physically needed more people back then than people do now.
Yeah, well, and particularly in the wake of World War II, like there's a lot of a lot of countries are trying to recover population rates for that exact reason.